Five Nights at Freddy's has a simple yet effective formula. A location opens, a bunch of people die, it gets shut down, a few years pass, and it reopens as if the deaths never happened, but with a new cast of animatronics. But today, we're here to talk about what happens in that in-between period, which is why I decided to bring you today's video. So, you know the drill? Take your time, grab something to eat, and get ready to see what happens to the FNaF animatronics when the games are over. I started thinking about it and I realized I didn't really have a video explaining this topic because, contrary to what people might think, very few people know what happens to the animatronics once the games end, except for a few exceptions. So in this video, we're going to analyze all the games, from FNaF 4 to Pizzeria Simulator, and then Security Breach, a total of 8, and we'll do it in chronological order. FNaF 4, Sister Location, FNaF 2, FNaF 1, FNaF 3, Pizzeria Simulator, and finally Security Breach. Our story begins roughly on July 18th, 1983, the first day of the Crying Child's birthday week in FNaF 4. Here we have several animatronics, mainly the Nightmares and the Springlocks. We start with the Nightmares, which attack the Crying Child at night, stalking him in his room. And what happens to them once all the nights are over? Well, it depends on whether we think they're real or not. If they aren't, you might just assume he dies and they never existed, but there's plenty of evidence proving they are real. If you want to know more, you can check out other videos, but we know that if the Nightmares did exist, they were developed by Afton Robotics, meaning they stayed underground after the Crying Child dies and William Afton disappears. This is backed up by the logbook, where we see several of them underground, and they're eventually incinerated by a Fazbear Entertainment technician. Next, we move on to the Fun Times from Sister Location, who probably have the longest story of all. These animatronics were made for Circus Baby's Pizza World, but once the location shuts down after just one day of being open, they're moved underground and become part of Circus Baby's entertainment and rental, where we meet them in the game around 1985. Then they escape the facility with Michael Afton's death, roughly on July 5th of that year, a little over a week after the first Freddy's closure. Michael carries Ennard inside him, an animatronic that contains the artificial intelligence and consciousness of Funtime Freddy, Funtime Foxy, Ballora, and Circus Baby, but the suits stay underground in the scooping room until Michael expels them into the sewers. There, they decide to return underground to reassemble themselves and kick Baby out of the collective. That's why they each rebuild themselves using old prototypes they find underground. But let's set their story aside for a moment because now we move on to Five Nights at Freddy's 2. There's a lot to analyze here. For starters, we have the Wizards and the Puppet, built for the first Freddy's that opened in 1983 and closed in 1985. Then they were taken and used as parts in the second Freddy's of 1987. We also have the toys, which were made exclusively for this location, and finally the Springlocks. Their story is very complicated, but to sum it up, by this point, the Fredbear that bit the Crying Child in 1983 had been dismantled, while the Spring Bonnie, which would later become Scrap Trap, stayed in that abandoned location presumably. At the same time, the first Fredbear, aka Withered Freddy, and the second Spring Bonnie, aka Springtrap, were brought to this 1987 location in a safe room. Once this location shuts down due to the infamous bite of 87, the two are dismantled. The Wizards are repaired to open a third Freddy's the following year, and the Springlocks are taken to that same location. This brings us to the pizzeria in FNaF 1. Here we know the puppet was present in some form, and when the pizzeria from the first game closes in late 1993 or early 1994, the purple guy shows up and dismantles the original animatronics, causing his own death and becoming Springtrap. This takes us straight to Five Nights at Freddy's 3 30 years later, at the Fazbear's Fright Horror attraction. Here we see the toys and the originals as parts of the attraction. We also see the puppet, which we know is real and was in this location, and of course there's Springtrap, and presumably Golden Freddy. Almost everyone's gathered, but it all goes to hell when Michael starts a fire and Springtrap escapes the location. Some time passes until we reach Pizzeria Simulator. Here, things are scaled down. There's Molten Freddy, containing the consciousnesses of Funtime Freddy, Funtime Foxy, and Ballora, plus Scrap Trap, a rebuilt Scrap Baby, and Lefty to trap the puppet. Everything's fine. There are also others like the Mediocre Melodies or the Rockstars, but no one cares about them, so let's skip straight to the fire. Here, the location burns down again, supposedly wiping out all remaining traces of Fazbear Entertainment's terror, or so we thought, because now we arrive at Security Breach. There are lots of new animatronics, especially from the books, but we'll get to them later. It turns out that after the Pizzeria Simulator fire, the pizzeria sank into a sinkhole and somehow, nobody knows how, we end up with the Blob. There are several theories about its origin, but the main one suggests Fazbear Entertainment dumped old animatronic parts into the drainage system, and the blob collected and assimilated them, housing characters like the puppet, Chica, Baby, and others in its body, along with Burntrap, who seems to be William Afton with a new endoskeleton that might be Glamrock Bonnie's. On the other hand, we have the Glamrock Animatronics, which were pretty much destroyed by the end of the game, and we'll see them soon in the Ruin DLC to find out what happened to them after the Pizzaplex closed. Still, I think we need to dive deeper into these topics. What happened to the FNaF 1 animatronics? What became of them? The FNaF 3 description says they found shells, but shells are different from suits. Plus, the trailer shows a box of toy animatronic parts. The old animatronics are nowhere to be seen, but they do appear in the trailer. So, were they dismantled? Thrown away? Are they still at Fazbear's Fright? And don't say they turned them into lamps. If an original animatronic is a noteworthy discovery, then they wouldn't toss out the FNaF 1 animatronics and turn them into lamps. Leave your thoughts in the comments. Another interesting question is, why do the FNaF 1 animatronics have separated parts? Well, I guess it's because they're much easier to clean and maintain. Plus, it adds a creepiness factor to the game. But to be honest, this has always bothered me. Scott can make characters without segmented joints like in Chipper and Sons, but for the game that was supposed to be about Chuck E. Cheese-style animatronics, he went with a segmented look. It also makes them more mobile. Sure, you could cover them with a big layer of whatever material that is, but that would mean the animatronic would have to constantly bend that material, which could lead to damage or make it hard for the endoskeleton to move depending on how stiff everything is. All the animatronics in the series follow this logic with segmented shells. Of course, many of them are made of hard plastic or metal, but I doubt the material covering the FNaF 1 models is flexible and light enough for the endoskeleton to bend practically. Plus, as others have said, it makes cleaning or disassembly easier. Friends, the FNaF world is vast when it comes to theories. I think I'll make thousands of theory videos about these games too. I suppose that's all for today. Remember to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.